In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you, said the logical Mr. Darcy to Elizabeth. After battling his dislike for her poor family connections, which hugely affected him, and his love for her. And love won. Love conquers everything in the end. At least, that's what I feel it should, ideally. I remember reading Pride and Prejudice for the first time when I was around 15 years old. And like most women, I fell in love, unquestionably, with Mr. Darcy. I fell in love with the love that Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth shared. I fell in love with the very idea of love. Since then, I have been a die-hard romantic, looking for and searching for evidence of true love. Somewhere, all of us, no matter how left-brained, no matter how analytical and practical, want to believe that unconditional love can truly exist. What is unconditional love? What is it really? Is it about complete acceptance? Isn't it about not letting little grievances we have against the other person to build into resentment and just continuing to love them no matter what? Or maybe it means finding a way to falling in love with their imperfections too. Okay, that sounds like a little too much to ask, but maybe it's just fully accepting the other person, flaws and all, knowing that each of us has a bit of it too. To me, as a kid growing up, the idea of unconditional love, as cliched as it may sound, could be so strong that you could even take a bullet to your heart for the other person. Of course, a parent would give his or her life for a child, and many children would give their lives for parents too. But what about two complete strangers? Can they have unconditional love for each other? This was what I wondered about. As much as I wanted to believe in it, as a 15-year-old, my faith was getting shakier by the second. Was it unconditional love that I had that was making me starve myself to death, to look skinny and attractive for the football captain of my school? I loved him and I told him so. And he proceeded never to talk to me again. He was more interested in Salma, my lucky classmate, who incredibly looked like Salma Hayek, her namesake. What was it that made him stare at her all the time? I could never figure that out. What was it that kept my pots and pans throwing, fighting neighbors together for 25 years, even though in addition to love, they seemed to hate each other? What was it that made my best friend, Tanu, scribble her boyfriend's name all over her desk and sigh repeatedly? What was it that made my aunt fast every single Tuesday, and spend hours praying to the Lord? What was it? Would all of them have taken a bullet for their love? Maybe, maybe not. The most my teenage brain could decide was that I wanted to believe in this concept. But every time some evidence emerged, the flip side of it would also emerge. It was Atlanta, Georgia, a year later, and I was visiting my maternal uncles and cousins during one of my high school vacations. Murali is my cousin, and during those days, he was studying at a university there. Murali is also a romantic like me, so much so that he changed his name in the US to the very filmy Bollywood name of Raj. Yes, Raj, exactly. Raj. Totally. Yes. The two of us spoke a lot about our miserable love lives. We discussed my 15-year-old heart, which was broken because of the footballer, and his 18-year-old one, which was broken by a girl in his college. Raj was like other guys in most ways, with his obsession for sports and his overwhelming affection for long drives in his car at demonic speeds. And like me, he was also looking for love and trying to understand it. And did our Raj fall in love? Oh yes, he did. With a beautiful, red-headed Russian beauty named Malia. She was like a ginger version of Maria Sharapova with a little Mila Jovovich tossed in. Well, my brother was lucky. Malia loved him back. She liked the exotic Indian in him. By the way, I hate that word exotic in reference to Indians. Seriously. Thanks to Miss Priyanka Chopra and millions others like her. They make it sound like that's the only USP we have, being exotic. Malia loved my dear Tam Bram Indian brother, supposedly vegetarian brother. She loved him so much that she started visiting our home in the US as much as she could. She tried to get along with people in our family. And Malia was fascinated with India. She was actually like a human Instagram. She took pictures of everything at our home. She took pictures of every Iyer dish being cooked. She took pictures of our god idols. She took pictures of the shiny cooking vessels, much to the annoyance of my grandma, who constantly complained to Murli that she looked at her favorite modern cooking pot like it was an ancient holy artifact from the Mughal Empire. Malia also liked to talk about India. She asked my grandpa a lot about snakes in his village, and my grandpa would puff up his chest and spend many hours telling pretty Malia all about cobras and death-defying snake charmers along with elephants and rivers that found their way winding through our ancestral village. Most of the time, I listened with a heavy dose of skepticism. After all, my grandfather spent most of his life in Chennai, a metro city in India, where snakes, let alone snake charmers, were actually pretty hard to find. Well, I think he just liked being asked and felt obligated not to let pretty Malia down. Maybe this was the reason why my grandmother never liked the girl too much. She renamed her Mallika or Malliga as they call in Tamil, and she called her that all the time, much to her annoyance. I also noticed that Malia learned to cook or tried to cook Indian food, usually with disastrous consequences. But after a few bouts with the smoke alarm, she did manage to make her love for dosas and chutney known. And my poor brother was resigned to a life of eating dosas and chutneys with her for a long, long time. Alright. With my usual fascination to understand love and all its facets, I tried to analyze what it was that Raj and Malia actually loved about each other. All I could understand was that Malia loved Raj for his Indianness and Raj, well, he could hardly take his eyes off Malia, so I didn't need to analyze that any further. I wondered whether Raj would take a bullet for Malia and vice versa. However, I was too embarrassed to ask them this, or maybe I suspected I already knew the answer, so I simply didn't ask. It was around this time, when Malia was getting acquainted with our family, that my cousin Madhu came to visit, and she brought along Malcolm, a jet black Cocker Spaniel. Malcolm was as all dogs are, full of life and spirit. He was a vegetarian dog, of course, since he now belonged to a vegetarian family. My grandma would never allow Malcolm to eat meat. And like a true Tam Bram Iyer family dog, Tair Sadam or curd rice was his favorite dish. I remember my grandma wiping her eyes with tears of joy when Malcolm would finish his bowl of Tair Sadam, almost as if it was her long-lost son who had reincarnated in a canine form and was relishing the bowl with gusto. This was my first experience of being near a dog. My dad, who was being chased by one of the dogs over a wall in his teens, was scared of dogs and had warned me against these ferocious creatures. So I usually had stayed away. But Malcolm was different. Malcolm welcomed me each morning with tail wags and enthusiastic barking, as if I was an army soldier who came back from a war after years, rather than just a sleepy teen who walked out of a bedroom. Malcolm truly loved everybody. Even my baby sister, who was a toddler, and whose favorite pastime was to pretend he was a horse and try to ride him. Something that dogs usually don't take to. He also didn't mind my 5-year-old cousin brother, who would clip clothespins onto Malcolm's ears. The dog was very forgiving. He would in fact pop them off with a flick of his back legs over in the next room so as to not hurt anybody's feelings. Malcolm was winning everybody's heart, except maybe Raj's, whose heart was not his anyways. Despite this, the dog was fascinated with both Raj and Malia and would never miss an opportunity to trot beside them on their solitary walks. However, the most affection the love-struck couple could bestow on him was an absent-minded pat on his head. Malcolm didn't mind that their reaction to him was so subdued. He just loved being around them. Then one day suddenly the unthinkable happened. Raj came home almost in tears and with no Malia beside him. He just shut himself in a room and refused to speak to anyone. He was like a little Matrushaka doll, confined in a shell within a shell within a shell. And for days he continued in silence, coming out only for meals and hardly saying a word to anyone. And as Bollywood as he was, he also managed to grow a neat little beard, which made him look the part of a scorned, disappointed lover, exactly like Shah Rukh Khan and Devdas. I was of course shocked. How could this be? Wasn't true love supposed to last forever? Would Elizabeth have ever left Mr. Darcy? Then how could my real life ideal couple drift apart like this? No amount of requests from me or my sisters got any information out of Raj. No amount of my uncle's demands got any answers from him. Even the drama and tears that my aunt shed, cursing the red-headed woman who had ruined her son's life, had no effect on him. My grandma enjoyed herself thoroughly, I suspect, by telling anyone and everyone who would listen about the Cold War and about how she always knew Mallika was never to be trusted. Yes, Mallika was never to be trusted. Malcolm was the only soul oblivious to all of this. He would find a way to sneak to Raj's side and put a tiny smile on his face by jumping over him and licking him all over. Raj, always the Indian hero, decided to drown his breakup troubles by leaving for a jog every morning, followed by Malcolm at his side. A few weeks passed. Raj replaced my grandma as the one who would feed Malcolm. Raj replaced my uncle as the one who would exercise and play with Malcolm. Raj soon became the only one who could give Malcolm a bath without making him howl. Malcolm hated soap and water, but not when Raj was holding the soap and turning on the tap. Over time, Raj started changing back to his normal self. In fact, he recovered enough to tell us one day that Malia had actually dumped him for an even more exotic-looking Indian. And a Gujarati at that. Well, we poor Tams certainly can't compare with that level of exoticness. Raj and Malcolm became inseparable. Sometimes when Raj was at his desk writing away, Malcolm would sit next to his feet and look at Raj with complete devotion in his eyes. I'm sure Raj knew that Malia never looked at him that way. Maybe my grandmother's frying pan, but never him. My vacation was coming to an end and I had to leave. I said bye to a much happier Raj and to his now best friend Malcolm with a heavy heart. I was going to miss them both a lot. And soon I was back in Mumbai with my own parents and I got back to my regular school routine with only the periodic weekend call from Atlanta giving us news from there. One day, after many months, my mum was called by my aunt on a Tuesday from the US and she seemed to be crying inconsolably and saying something about Malcolm. I grabbed the phone and begged my aunt to tell me what had happened. And this is what she said. Raj and Malcolm left on one of their long drives in his convertible, with Malcolm sitting obediently on his side. On the highway, my brother was driving at his usual demonic speed when Malcolm jumped onto his lap. My surprised brother pushed him away and chided him to sit quietly, But Malcolm ignored him and continued to sit on his lap, jump on his lap again. Raj stopped at a signal with a huge truck in front of him and many cars coming behind him. Malcolm sat tight on Raj's lap, covering his chest and not budging an inch despite all of Raj's admonitions. When a huge car hit Raj's car, and Raj's car hit the truck in front with a huge collision. And this collision caused the airbag to release, and Malcolm was hit first and then Raj. They were both taken to the hospital where Malcolm breathed his last, but Raj was saved. The doctors say that Raj would have been in grave danger of death, or at least very severe injury, if the airbag had directly hit him on the chest with the force of the collision, if Malcolm wasn't in between to buffer it. They say dogs have ESP. Maybe it's true. Or maybe my grandma was right after all. Malcolm was our reincarnated uncle who saved his nephew's life. We don't know. Raj doesn't have complete memory of those moments. But one thing we do know. Malcolm saved my brother. He took a bullet for him, knowingly, unselfishly, and just because he loved him. And I have been given the gift of finally witnessing true love. Until date, this has been the only story of unconditional love that I've ever heard of. Maybe it means we human beings are too critical of each other to make peace with each other's shortcomings. Maybe it means that human beings just have the bigger brains and animals have the bigger heart. I don't know. Maybe it means we are hardwired for self-preservation above all. However, if I find any human with half the heart and capacity to love the way Malcolm had, I plan to write a book in his or her honor and swear to make it sell better than Pride and Prejudice. Thank you.